she really has to sort of like pass the camel through the eye of a needle, and that is trying to address what's plain reality, that the entirety of NPR is on the left. That's not news to anybody. And to say otherwise would just be absurd. Like you can't even make the argument. But she can't actually say that, because then you'd be saying, that basically the emperor has no clothes.
Well, Katherine Maher is probably a familiar face to you if you follow the censorship issue closely. Now the CEO and president of NPR, National Public Radio, Maher was the head of the Wikimedia Foundation for a long time. In some interesting timing, actually, Maher also is the chair of the Signal Board of Directors. Signal is very much in the news this week. So she was testifying about NPR, about her leadership at NPR, about NPR's political bias in front of the House of Representatives yesterday, and there were fireworks. This was a committee hearing of the Oversight and Government Reform. This was a subcommittee that's actually chaired by Marjorie Taylor Greene, and Republicans really had a field day with Katherine Maher. So I want to play a couple of clips here. This first one is Maher getting questioning from a Republican member about the makeup of the editorial board of NPR.
You're a rabid progressive. And do you not think it's a problem that your political leanings make it seem to the American people that you're not biased and that you're not doing your job? Because you agree that your job is to have journalistic integrity, right?
Absolutely, but there is a strong firewall between the newsroom and anything that I
Let's
do.
talk about the newsroom. You have 87 registered Democrats, not a single Republican in your editor board. So, I mean, how does that work to give us the perception that you're doing your job of actually delivering unbiased information?
Well, I would agree with you that that number is a concern if it is accurate. I do believe that we need to have journalists who represent the full breadth of the American society so that we can report well for all Americans.
Well, I think that you are failing. I realize you've only been there for a year, but I just really think that while it is a small portion of your budget, you very much should expect to restructure your revenue streams, because I don't think that NPR is necessarily worth saving.
Now, this next clip is Representative Brandon Gill, obviously a Republican, pushing Maher on a post that she'd made on social media back in 2020 about whether or not she read or endorsed or supported the message of a particular book.
Do you believe that America is addicted to white supremacy?
I believe that I tweeted that, and as I've said earlier, I believe much of my thinking has evolved over the last half decade.
It has evolved. Why did you tweet that?
I don't recall the exact context, sir, so I wouldn't be able to say.
Okay. Do you believe that America believes in black plunder and white democracy?
I don't believe that, sir.
You tweeted that in reference to a book you were reading at the time, apparently, The Case for Reparations.
I don't think I've ever read that book, sir.
You tweeted about it. You said you took a day off to fully read The Case for Reparations. You put that on Twitter in January of 2020.
Apologies, I don't recall that I did.
Okay.
I'd no doubt that your tweet there is correct, but I don't recall that.
Okay. Do you believe that white people inherently feel superior to other races?
I do not.
You don't? You tweeted something to that effect. You said, I grew up feeling superior. How white of me. Why did you tweet that?
I think I was probably reflecting on what it was to grow up in an environment where I had lots of advantages.
It sounds like you're saying that white people feel superior.
I don't believe that anybody feels that way, sir. I was just reflecting on my own experiences.
Do you think that white people should pay reparations?
I've never said that, sir.
Yes, you did. You said it in January of 2020. You tweeted, yes, the North, yes, all of us, yes, America, yes, our original collective sin and unpaid debt, yes, reparations, yes, on this day.
I don't believe that was a reference to fiscal reparations, sir.
What kind of reparations was it a reference to?
I think it was just a reference to the idea that we all owe much to the people who came before us.
That's a bizarre way to frame what you tweeted. Okay, how much reparations have you personally paid?
Sir, I don't believe that I've ever paid reparations.
Okay, it's just for everybody else.
I'm not asking anyone to pay reparations.
Seems to be what you're
sir.
suggesting. Do you believe that looting is morally wrong?
I believe that looting is illegal, and I refer to it as counterproductive. I think it should be prosecuted.
Do you believe it's morally wrong, though?
Of course.
Of course. Then why did you refer to it as counterproductive? It's a very different way to describe it.
It is both morally wrong and counterproductive, as well as being
You
illegal.
tweeted, it's hard to be mad about protests in reference to the BLM protests, not prioritizing the private property of a system of oppression. You didn't condemn the looting. You said that it was counterproductive. NPR also promoted a book called In Defense of Looting. Do you think that that's an appropriate use of taxpayer dollars?
I'm unfamiliar with that book, sir, and I don't believe that was at my time
You
at
tweeted
NPR.
that you read that book, but
I don't believe that I did read that.
Many people remember the case of Yuri Berliner, who was a long-time staffer at NPR and editor at NPR, who just last year actually came out and blew the whistle on what he saw as somebody on the left, the center left, as decades of significant bias that had stacked up at NPR, made working there for him untenable. He published a now famous essay in the Free Press at the time, blowing the whistle, explaining how all of this worked. Katherine Maher was asked about her relationship or non-relationship with Yuri Berliner yesterday, and Berliner, who is now a contributing editor at the Free Press, posted, Katherine Maher just said, quote, I wish I had the opportunity to speak with Mr. Berliner when I was at NPR, but she did. Berliner adds, I welcomed her hiring at NPR in my Free Press essay last year. I would have been happy to speak with her about what I wrote. My essay closed with a welcome, quote, I'll be rooting for her. But then I was suspended, and Katherine Maher posted a statement on the NPR website calling my words, quote, profoundly disrespectful, hurtful, and demeaning. It's still there. So there you have him kind of blowing the whistle again, actually on this entire attempt by Maher to placate Congress. And Maher came under significant scrutiny from Chris Rufo last year when she was named the president and CEO of NPR. He actually posted a list of questions that Congress should ask her when she was before the subcommittee. A couple of them, I mean, they're all very interesting because she's genuinely a fascinating figure who kind of comes from the upper echelons of the NGO world, the left-leaning NGO world. But a couple of them, just as an example, she says in 2016, or Chris Rufo says that in 2016, Maher chastised Hillary Clinton for using the words boy and girl, arguing that her words were, quote, erasing language for non-binary people. Can you tell us what a non-binary person is? And can you define the word woman for us? So questions basically to put her into this corner as someone who now is the head of an organization that's $11 million in federal funding, is very much threatened by the Trump administration, by DOJ, by people in the government who are looking to save significant amounts of money for NPR from the federal budget. And NPR takes up, it's a relatively insignificant portion of this, but it has been a target of Republicans for years looking to cut waste and push back on bias. So these threats are more serious now than they ever have been before. She has to defend her own history, personally and professionally, and she has to defend this ideology when there's been a significant backlash to the ideology, and even people on the left, like Yuri Berliner and others, are speaking out against it. So, here to break all of this down, and join the show once again, it's Ashley Rinsberg, who is a senior editor over at Pirate Wires. He is the author of the book The Gray Lady Winked, which is a very interesting expose on the New York Times and its history. Ashley Rinsberg, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you guys for having me. Appreciate it.
It's great to have you to react to Katherine Maher's testimony on Capitol Hill yesterday, because it's been pretty buzzy, pretty viral, and for some good reasons. There were some pretty funny moments, but you've covered Wikipedia in particular very closely, which is where Maher comes from before she went to NPR. What was your reaction to what you saw go down yesterday?
It's like really typical Maher speak is what we got there, and she's really good at that. She's been like really kind of groomed her entire career to like get up on the TED stage or now the congressional testimony, say the right things. But the weird thing here is that like all the right things that she said, all the talking points that she hit, I think would have passed muster 5-10 years ago. It looks very professional and polished. But today it has the exact opposite effect. People see right through it. They're not buying it. And then you have a character like Marjorie Taylor Greene kind of going on full frontal assault, and you just create this immense collision, which is what we got. We got fireworks, we got political entertainment. But you also saw some people bringing a real challenge to Maher and her tenure at NPR, where she's CEO, and the obvious tilt toward the left that's going on there.
Well, and again, I'm curious from your reporting on Wikipedia, a lot of which coincides with her tenure there. Why is she such the word that comes to mind for me is archetypical figure of the progressive left's approach to speech issues? Like, she's sort of the perfect person for Republicans to put in front of a congressional testimony or in front of a congressional committee and just go to town grilling.
Yeah, she really led Wikipedia, the Wikimedia Foundation, which owns the site, the Wikipedia site. She kind of really led this massive left turn away from the traditional mission of Wikipedia, which is build a open online encyclopedia, towards something that they called knowledge equity. This is all wrapped up in the DEI movement. It was all about turning Wikipedia into a movement. And it was called actually the movement strategy. This was her brainchild, and it was her legacy at Wikipedia. The problem with it is that Wikipedia has real challenges that it's facing today, lots of them. And I've reported on a number of these for Pirate Wires. But what Wikimedia Foundation is not doing is addressing the real challenges that Wikipedia is trying to deal with and that are sometimes seem to be threatening the site itself and its legitimacy. Instead, what they're doing is functioning as this pass-through for far left NGO funding. So they get lots of money. They've got around $400 million in assets, and they pass it through to these other smaller NGOs that are really far left. So a gigantic shift in the mission, in the culture at Wikimedia Foundation, all of it led by Maher.
And it's important, I think, to lay that groundwork as it's a good lens through which to look at her testimony, because the so-called vibe shift since November means that actually a lot of people are walking back from DEI, and it seems like she, asked by Brandon Gill about a book she said, I think this was in the summer of 2020, she was taking the day off to read a book about reparations. It's just like peak woke cringe. And she seemed to act like she didn't read the book. She didn't want to, fully embrace that particular post of hers. At the same time, she wouldn't concede that NPR has a bias problem. It was kind of an interesting line that she tried to walk. I'm curious what you made of the content of her testimony.
I mean, I don't envy Katherine Maher in that situation, because she really has to sort of like pass the camel through the eye of a needle. And that is trying to address what's plain reality, that the entirety of NPR is on the left. That's not news to anybody. And to say otherwise would just be absurd. Like, you can't even make the argument. But she can't actually say that, because then you'd be saying, that basically the emperor has no clothes. The thing you're not allowed to say, NPR does receive public funding like PBS. It's supposed to be balanced. It's supposed to balance different points of view and include different points of view, but that's manifestly not what it does. So she's in this impossible situation where she's not able to say the thing that we all know to be true, and she knows that we know it's true. She just can't say it.
And on the one hand, NPR during the pre-vibe shift era, I guess we're going to have to come up with a way to describe that, or a handy label, but because it's clearly different. NPR kind of ran towards that in the before times. Like, they would brag, as she did when she was at Wikipedia, about the becoming a good steward. It was sort of like the difference between stakeholder and shareholder capitalism, but for media. This was like a very explicit ambition to go left, because it was under the banner, and this, you wrote an entire book about the New York Times about becoming moral and defending human rights and defending love and kindness and all of that, but it was actually just like left-wing activism. There was no pretense of neutrality anymore. So it is kind of interesting, I guess, the point you just made, that instead of going forward with that argument, it's like they're trying to dress it up or pretend that's not what they're doing.
Yeah, they're definitely on the defensive here. I mean, it's hard for them to argue otherwise. They could have, in a previous administration, with the Biden administration or Congress being more inclined to these kinds of ideas, they could have sort of used the code language, like exactly what you were saying. about moral take on reporting, ethical reporting, and diverse perspectives, and all the kind of buzzwords that we know about that like were just code for left-wing politics. But you can't get away with that today. I think the other thing people should be aware of with Maher particularly is her deep ties to George Soros, not just that are sort of within her career, which there are ties in her career, but in her philosophy. So when you go back and look at Maher's her track record, what you start to see is Maher speaking a lot about the concept of an open society. And that's, as we know, it's George Soros's biggest philanthropy is called Open Society Foundations. That's for a reason. They share the same political philosophy, and she echoes him. If you go back and look at her speeches, where he'll give a big speech at Davos, and months later, she'll give the same speech content-wise, using the same terms and about the same topics in a different forum. She's an acolyte of Soros. I think we should be clear about that. So it's not an accident that she brought these ideas into Wikimedia Foundation during this period. And this would have been around late 2016, 2017, right at the rise of identity politics, where things were getting really hot around that topic. And again, she saw a forming wave that she could surf, maybe for her own career, which definitely turned out to be the case, but also to push Wikimedia Foundation towards a new horizon, to expand its vision, to do what any really great leader of an institution does, which is grow that institution, not just kind of actually do the thing she's saying, which is being a steward, but she's talking about something that is much more revolutionary.
And she, I guess, also was, I believe, on the board of Signal, or has been on the board of Signal, which is interesting timing, right? I mean, she's tied into what feels like the upper echelon of NGO world, like left-leaning NGO world.
Yes, and she was also the, I believe, CEO of Web Summit, which is the big startup and tech conference globally. She is very much in all of these worlds, and she got her start in sort of a strange Lebanese voting NGO that was monitoring voting in Lebanon. She's also been accused publicly by one of her former friends and colleagues of being a CIA agent. Whether or not that's true, there's no evidence, but this was someone who actually served in government and knew her for many years, made this accusation publicly. So there are all these kinds of questions swirling around Maher. I don't know what the answer to the intelligence stuff is. What I do know is that the stuff she did at Wikimedia Foundation, Wikipedia, it has been absolutely lasting. She's made an indelible effect. Whether or not you think it's good or bad, that's a different story. But her impact has been enormous. And for us downstream of that, that means that the Wikipedia that we see, the content that we consume, the content that's used to train ChatGPT and other LLMs, and that gets filtered down to Google, is affected directly by these policies. Because again, even though WMF doesn't set policy, they can't control what editors do on the site, but they can control oversight. They can control how things are structured in Wikipedia. And while they're kind of funding protest movements on the left, they're not actually worried about the dumpster fire that Wikipedia is becoming in many cases.
She sort of embodies the tension between the quote-unquote open society ideology and the using that as the packaging for censorship, I guess. That this was, especially coming out of Silicon Valley, open society ideology was prevalent. It was, fuels the Arab Spring in 2011 is the Arab Spring. And then come to find out, after Trump, all of the open society people were actually trying to engineer an open society that was less open than they wanted it to be. It sounds like Ashley, she's really the embodiment of that tension.
Very much so. And when you think about her at NPR, you're seeing a career on a massive upward trajectory. Where she goes after that, it's, the sky's the limit for her. I imagine she will continue to accrue power. I mean, she's done everything right within her career. And even in these cases where she's getting some pressure in front of Congress, she's handles it very well. I mean, this is someone who's experienced with this stuff. She's prepared for it. She's not naive, but that comes with the territory. She's been trained for this type of stuff, and she excels at it.
And Republicans are very serious about their threats to NPR. Do you have an expectation on where that might go? Even though, to your point, she's a capable, she can testify and get through it without fully falling on her face. But I don't think she helped her case too much yesterday. But there's also nothing super new. Everyone kind of has known for years that NPR is what it is. Republicans seem to be very serious about making good on those decades-long threats right now. What do you expect to see?
I think we're going to see a pretty good tussle play out, and I don't think it's going to be easy for Republicans to steamroll an institution like NPR. The culture is so deeply ingrained there; it's so embedded in what they do. You can't change it one day to the next without really destroying it. And I actually don't think they're going to be able to destroy it, even if they wanted to. So it's going to be a fight. But I think what the potential positive outcome here is that the pressure, the attention, the awareness that NPR is feeling on this issue helps it, motivates it to moderate somewhat, to say, all right, we're going to at least have to have like 3, 4, 5, we could even call them token conservative voices, but at least something, which they, at this point, they don't even have token. Like the New York Times has done that somewhat, like they've hired these voices that represent that divergent viewpoint. NPR doesn't even go to that extent. So that would be a great start. I don't think it's going to be the kind of shift the Republicans are really looking for, especially not with someone like Maher in charge. She is gatekeeping and safeguarding that institution. And again, if you were on her side of things, or if you were someone involved with the Soros extended ecosystem, this is who you would want keeping that institution safe from the hands of people like MTG.
And finally, given the quote-unquote vibe shift that I keep referencing, is there any sincere ideological shift among people like Maher in that kind of open society world? Are they genuinely losing power? Will they change their minds about any of this? Has the election of Trump and the cultural backlash to identity politics and censorship, has that caused everyone to turn a corner on the issue? Is the anti-censorship movement turning a corner, or are the Mahers just being a little bit more clever about how they can crack down in the future?
I think this is a group of people who are fully committed to their cause and to the ideology and the political philosophy behind it. It is so all-encompassing, especially when you deal with anything Soros related, anything related to open society foundations, but even more importantly to the open society philosophy. I don't think this for them is about rethinking their position. I think this for them is about rethinking their strategy. It might be a tactical retreat at the moment, but Soros, Obama and Obama's people used to love this quote about finding an opportunity in every crisis. That was actually a Soros quote that they took and they kind of like publicized it and promoted it. But that's that's key to everything he does. That's not just tactical. It's that when you have crisis, you have an opportunity, because that presents an opportunity for radical change. And I think when they sort of get their bearings here, what they're going to see is that, again, there's a crisis. This is a crisis of a very different kind than what we'd previously seen. But nevertheless, there is some kind of social and political crisis here, and they will find a way to adapt to it and to leverage it for political, social, and cultural change that they're trying to drive.
Ashley Rinsberg, thank you so much for joining us and breaking this all down.
Thanks, Emily. Good to see you.
Well, make sure to subscribe on YouTube, wherever you download your podcasts, and of course over at undercurrents.tv to the full premium experience of the show. You get paywalled episodes for subscribers only, a weekly newsletter from me for subscribers only, and an email address for subscribers only, in addition to some great stuff from Unheard. Closing thoughts here is now that we are seeing video of a Turkish national student at Tufts University being apprehended, apparently by ICE agents. There's more to come in this story, but we're seeing that juxtaposed with the right pouncing, and I think reasonably so, all over Katherine Maher, owning the free speech issue. And I just want to say, I think that two-shot is going to be increasingly difficult for Republicans. I find it unfortunate that there's so much kind of definition expansion happening on this particular issue. We've talked on the show, I'm sort of sympathetic to the idea that you shouldn't be bringing in people who openly have said they hate the country that you're bringing them into. But once you've issued those visas, and we don't have to get back into the weeds on all of this, the free speech question, to really fully own it and embrace it for Republicans, I think they're going to have to do better, because I think there are going to be a lot of pressures on them going forward. So just a quick thought that came to mind while we were talking here with Ashley. So appreciate you tuning in, and we will be back with more Undercurrents soon.